The ancient Egyptians are very well known for their religious beliefs and their way of preserving the dead for the afterlife. This week on Crash Course, we'll be studying their religious and afterlife beliefs. We'll answer the questions: what did they believe in, and why did they believe it?
In ancient Egypt, religion was an important part of their daily lives. The religion in early Egypt had its roots in the worship of nature deities, and the first gods were in the form of animals. After some time, gods in human form became fused with gods in animal form, and this resulted in an interesting mix of human bodies with animal parts. Ancient Egyptian religion was a complex system of polytheistic beliefs and rituals, which were an important part of ancient Egyptian society. Important religious practices were focused on the pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Even though he was human, the Egyptians believed that he was a descendant from gods. He acted as the negotiator between his people and the gods, and was obligated to sustain the gods through rituals and offerings so that they could maintain order in the universe. The ancient Egyptians believed in many different gods and goddesses, each one with their own role to play in maintaining peace and harmony across the land. One of the gods is Nut. Nut is usually shown in human form, her elongated body symbolizing the sky. Each limb represents a cardinal point as her body stretches over the earth. Nut swallowed the setting sun, Ra, each evening and gave birth to him each morning. She's often depicted on the ceilings of tombs, on the inside lid of coffins, and on the ceilings of temples. Shu. Shu is the father of Nut and Geb. He and his wife were the first gods created by Atum. Shu was a god of the air and sunlight, or more precisely dry air, and his wife represented moisture. He was normally depicted as a man wearing a headdress in the form of a plume, which is also hieroglyphic for his name. Geb. As an earth god, he was associated with fertility, and it was believed that earthquakes were the laughter of Geb. He is mentioned in the pyramid texts as imprisoning the buried dead within his body. And finally, Anubis is a protector of the dead. He is shown as a jackal head man, or as a jackal. He was closely associated with mummification and as a protector of the dead. It was Anubis who conducted the deceased to the hall of judgment. While we're on the topic of death, Emily is going to talk about the afterlife in ancient Egypt.
Perhaps the most important part of their religious beliefs was the need to preserve the body. The mummification process was part of the ancient Egyptians' burial practices and the part of the afterlife. This may have been because early settlers in the Nile Valley would bury dead people in the hot desert sands or in Egypt. When these ancient Egyptians buried the dead, they didn't want their bodies to get washed away in the Nile in the floods, and they also didn't want to use up their farmland for a cemetery. Therefore, the dead were buried near the living part of Egypt in the dry desert sands. These deserts are so dry that if you bury someone in them, they will quickly lose all moisture, and the bacteria that decomposes the body can't survive, so the body just dries up and makes a natural mummy. For Egyptians, it was normal for the body to be preserved. They probably thought that it was natural for it to decay into a skeleton when they placed it in the pyramids and their tombs. They probably thought there was an important reason for why the bodies didn't decay. Most of the preserved bodies found in ancient Egypt are natural mummies, but there is way more skeletons than mummies in the tombs of the age of the pyramids. The problem that the ancient Egyptians discovered after burying their bodies in the hot dry sand after many years was that animal scavengers would sometimes eat the bodies, and thieves could easily steal the things inside the graves. That's why 5,500 years ago, the Egyptians started burying people in wooden boxes or stone tombs. Since these boxes or tombs didn't let the hot sand stop the bodies from decaying, this caused them to turn into skeletons. For the Egyptians who were used to bodies being mummified, this problem with the skeletons was unacceptable. So around 2650 to 2159 BCE in the Old Kingdom, Egyptians started making artificial mummies. Here's a step-by-step process of how the mummification took place. First, they inserted a hook through a hole near the nose and pulled out part of the brain. Then they made a cut on the left side of the body, near the tummy. They removed all the internal organs and let them dry. Then they placed the lungs, intestines, stomach, and liver inside canopic jars. They then placed the heart back inside the body, because it was believed that the soul was in the heart. They rinsed the inside of the body with wine and spices, and covered the corpse with natron, a type of salt, for 70 days. After 40 days, they would stuff the body with linen or sand to give it a more human shape. And after 70 days, they would wrap the body from head to toe in bandages and place it in a sarcophagus. The Egyptians saw the afterlife as a duplication of the best moments of their life. They expected that the afterlife would be filled with activities that they enjoyed the most, like fishing, hunting, feasting, and sailing. Death was not believed to be an end, but it was a beginning. The concept of the afterlife was known by all Egyptians, regardless of their social status. However, the preparation varied depending on your social class. For all of the deceased bodies, they must be preserved in a lifelike form. Secondly, the deceased must be provided with items that are necessary for life in the hereafter. The goods varied depending on your social class. For peasants, only a few simple possessions, but for royal persons, an elaborate storehouse of treasures. The royals' tombs commonly had a large amount of food, supplies, furniture, jewelry, and games. Whether you were rich or poor, you believed that the essence of the deceased continued to be tied to this world even after death. The beliefs of ancient Egyptians can easily be tied to the strands of history. For evidence, there's a lot of evidence of the ancient Egyptians' beliefs in religion and afterlife. There have been thousands of mummies uncovered in the deserts of Egypt. There has been a ton of ancient hieroglyphs discovered that tell stories of their many gods. These stories of the gods were meant to explain their origins and the things they represented. And from this evidence we can see the way the Egyptians lived and how they believed in the afterlife and their gods. Continuity and change in Egypt. The details of religious belief changed over time as the importance of particular gods rose and fell during different kingdoms. Sometimes different gods were more important or less important, including the sun god Ra, and the creator god Amun, and the mother goddess Isis. There was also a change in how the Egyptians viewed the afterlife. At first they believed that only the pharaoh and other really important people got to go to the afterlife with the gods, but soon they believed that everyone was allowed in as long as they were properly mummified. Ethical dimensions in ancient Egypt. Today people would find it unethical to take all the guts out of dead people and put them in jars of salt, but for Egyptians, this was the only right way to treat a dead person. In conclusion, ancient Egyptians had very detailed beliefs in the afterlife and how the world worked, because of the gods. During your time on Earth you had to be good, or you wouldn't get to spend your time in the afterlife with the gods. This may have been why Egypt lasted so long, because these beliefs would cause people to be obedient.